Marcus Chen adjusted his thermal scanner for the 100th time that night, watching the dense canopy of Kepler 442b's ancient forests through green-tinted display. The triple moons cast eerie shadows between the massive trees, each one thick enough to house a small settlement. His breathing came steady through the environmental suit, but sweat still beaded on his forehead despite the climate control. Day 14 of tracking. He whispered into his voice recorder, a habit he'd developed during his years as a xenobiologist. The Draconis majesticus family unit continues to evade capture. Intelligence suggests they're protecting newly hatched offspring somewhere in this sector. The Galactic Conservation Alliance had been clear in their mission brief. The dragon-like creatures of Kepler 442b were facing extinction due to illegal poaching by various alien species who prized their scales and fire glands. Only 12 breeding pairs remained on the entire planet. When long-range sensors detected unusual heat signatures suggesting a successful hatching, the GCA immediately dispatched their best tracker. That tracker happened to be human. The other species in the Alliance still couldn't understand why humans excelled at this type of work. The Centaurians were too methodical, following predictable search patterns that intelligent prey could easily avoid. The crystalline hive mind of Arcturus moved too slowly, their shared consciousness making them predictable. The energy beings from the Veil Nebula couldn't maintain physical form long enough for extended hunts. Humans, however, were persistence predators. They could track for days, weeks, or even months. They adapted their strategies in real time, learned from failure, and never gave up. What other species saw as stubborn foolishness, humans called determination. Marcus paused at a massive tree root and knelt to examine fresh gouges in the bark. The marks were too deep and precise to be natural damage. Dragon claws, definitely. Adult-sized, which meant he was getting close to the family group. A low rumble echoed through the forest, so deep it seemed to come from the planet itself. Marcus froze, every muscle tense. That wasn't a hunting call or territorial warning. It was something else entirely. Pain, maybe, or distress. He'd studied these creatures for 3 years before accepting this mission. Draconis majesticus were highly intelligent, possibly more so than some sentient species in the Alliance. They used tools, demonstrated complex problem-solving abilities, and showed deep emotional bonds within family units. The fact that they were classified as animals rather than persons was purely political, based on their inability to develop space travel technology. Marcus often wondered if that classification was wrong. Following the sound, he moved carefully through the underbrush. His suit's adaptive camouflage shifted colors to match the surrounding vegetation, making him nearly invisible to normal vision. But dragons didn't rely on normal vision alone. They could sense heat signatures, electromagnetic fields, and even emotional states through specialized organs in their skulls. The rumbling came again, closer this time, accompanied by a higher-pitched whining sound. Marcus's blood ran cold as he recognized the pattern. He'd heard it once before, during his research on the species. It was a distress call from dragon young. Abandoning stealth for speed, Marcus ran toward the sounds. If poachers had found the nest before him, those hatchlings were as good as dead. Dragon scales didn't reach full value until the creatures matured, but young fire glands were considered a delicacy in certain systems. The black market price for a single hatchling could fund a small army. He burst through a wall of hanging vines into a clearing and stopped dead. No poachers. Instead, he found something far more heartbreaking. An adult female dragon lay on her side, her magnificent bronze scales dulled with exhaustion and pain. One wing was bent at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. Dark fluid seeped from several wounds along her flanks, wounds that looked like they came from the razor-sharp talons of her own kind. She'd fought something, probably the male of the pair, and lost. but it was what surrounded her that made Marcus's throat tighten with emotion. 6 small dragons, barely larger than house cats, huddled against their mother's still warm body. Their scales were soft and downy, shifting through colors as their camouflage instincts tried to kick in. They were maybe a week old, if that. The mother's great golden eyes found Marcus and held his gaze. There was intelligence there, and something that looked almost like relief. She made a soft clicking sound in her throat, and the hatchlings looked up at the human with curious, unafraid eyes. Marcus approached slowly, hands visible and empty. The mother dragon watched his every movement but didn't try to attack or flee. She was dying, and they both knew it. "Where's your mate?" Marcus asked softly, though he knew she couldn't understand his words. "Why isn't he protecting you?" As if in answer, a thunderous roar echoed from somewhere deeper in the forest. The mother dragon's head snapped up, her nostrils flaring. Fear flickered in her eyes, and she tried to struggle to her feet. The effort sent fresh blood flowing from her wounds. Marcus understood immediately. The male hadn't abandoned his family. He was leading threats away from them, sacrificing himself to give his mate and children a chance to survive. But the mother was too injured to move, and the hatchlings were too young to fend for themselves. Another roar, closer this time, followed by sounds of violent struggle. Energy weapon discharges lit up the night sky beyond the trees. Poachers. The male dragon was fighting for his life against armed hunters, and from the sound of it, he was losing. The mother dragon looked at Marcus again, and this time he was certain he saw understanding in her gaze. She was asking him something, pleading with him. Her massive head lowered until her snout was inches from his helmet, and she made a series of soft, complex sounds. "You want me to protect them," Marcus whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're asking a human to save your babies." The dragon's response was to gently nudge one of the hatchlings toward Marcus with her nose. The small creature stumbled forward on unsteady legs, looking up at the human with absolute trust. Marcus had come here to capture these dragons for their own protection, to relocate them to a sanctuary world where they could breed safely. But sanctuary worlds were still prisons, no matter how comfortable. These creatures belonged here, in these ancient forests, living free as their ancestors had for millions of years. The sounds of battle were growing fainter. Either the male dragon had driven off the poachers, or he was dead. Given the weapons Marcus had heard, he feared the worst. The mother dragon's breathing was becoming labored. She was fading fast, and she knew it. With tremendous effort, she began moving each of her hatchlings closer to Marcus, clicking and chirping instructions they couldn't possibly understand yet. "I can't take care of them," Marcus said, though he was already reaching out to touch the nearest hatchling. Its scales were incredibly soft, warm to the touch even through his gloves. "I don't know how to feed them or keep them safe. I'm just human." But even as he spoke the words, Marcus was running calculations in his head. His emergency shelter could be expanded to accommodate small creatures. His ration supplies included protein synthesizers that could be programmed for different species. His medical kit contained broad-spectrum healing compounds that worked on most carbon-based life forms. It was insane, impossible. He was a xenobiologist, not a nursemaid for alien orphans. The mother dragon made one final effort, lifting her great head to look directly into Marcus's eyes. The intelligence there was unmistakable, as was the desperate hope. She was dying, her mate was probably dead, and her children would die too unless this strange bipedal creature helped them. She was asking him to be their father. Marcus made his decision the way humans always made the important ones, with his heart instead of his head. "Okay," he whispered, reaching out to gather the nearest hatchling into his arms. "Okay, I'll take care of them. I promise." The relief in the mother dragon's eyes was heartbreaking. She settled back against the forest floor, her breathing becoming even more shallow. One by one, Marcus picked up the hatchlings, talking softly to them as he placed them in his expanded equipment pack. They seemed to understand that he meant no harm, making soft chirping sounds and nuzzling against his hands. The last hatchling, slightly smaller than the others, didn't want to leave its mother's side. Marcus had to gently coax it away, and when he did, the mother dragon managed one final gesture. She touched her snout to her smallest child's head, then to Marcus's helmet, in what could only be described as a blessing. Then she closed her eyes and was still. Marcus stood in the alien forest, holding 6 orphaned dragon hatchlings, and realized his life had just changed forever. He'd come here to capture dragons for science and conservation. Instead, he'd become their guardian, their protector, their unlikely human parent. In the distance, the sounds of battle had stopped entirely. The forest was quiet, except for the soft chirping of the babies in his arms and the whisper of wind through ancient leaves. Whatever happened next, there was no going back. He was committed now, for better or worse. The hatchlings looked up at him with trusting eyes, and Marcus felt a fierce protective instinct surge through him that had nothing to do with scientific duty and everything to do with basic humanity. These weren't just specimens or conservation projects anymore. They were his children now. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus became the unlikely guardian of 6 dragon hatchlings, and he was discovering that parenting alien creatures was far more challenging than any xenobiology textbook had prepared him for. His temporary research shelter, originally designed for 1 human, had been hastily modified into something resembling a nursery. The hatchlings had grown considerably in those weeks. What started as creatures the size of house cats were now approaching the size of medium dogs, their downy scales hardening into proper armor. Their personalities were becoming distinct, too. The largest, whom Marcus had named Atlas, was bold and curious, always the first to investigate new sounds or objects. Luna, the smallest from that terrible night, was cautious and observant, preferring to watch before acting. The others, Storm, Ember, Sage, and Frost, each showed their own unique traits. Marcus had long since abandoned any pretense of following his original mission. His reports to the Galactic Conservation Alliance had become increasingly creative exercises in misdirection. Continued tracking of target species, he would write. Subjects remain elusive, but signs suggest successful breeding event. Recommend extended observation period. What he didn't report was that he spent his days teaching dragon babies to hunt, to recognize dangerous plants, and to control their emerging fire-breathing abilities. What he definitely didn't mention was how they had begun sleeping curled up against him each night, treating him as their parent in every way that mattered. The real test of his new role came on a humid morning when his long-range sensors picked up an incoming ship. Marcus's blood ran cold as he recognized the signature. It wasn't the GCA vessel that was supposed to pick him up in 3 months. It was a Korthak raider, the same species that had been illegally hunting dragons on Kepler 442b. The Korthak were insectoid creatures from the Outer Rim, known for their ruthless efficiency and complete disregard for conservation laws. They had crude but effective technology, and most importantly, they had weapons capable of taking down adult dragons. A lone human and 6 juveniles wouldn't stand a chance in direct combat. Marcus immediately activated his shelter's stealth protocols, but he knew they wouldn't hold up under close inspection. The ship was conducting a methodical search pattern, and it was only a matter of time before they detected his presence. "Okay, kids," he said softly to the hatchlings, who had sensed his tension and were clustering around his legs. "We need to disappear for a while." He'd spent weeks learning their behavior patterns, and he knew they understood far more than they could communicate. When he began packing essential supplies into his field pack, they immediately started bringing him items they thought were important. Atlas dragged over Marcus's sleeping bag. Luna carefully carried his water purification tablets in her mouth. Storm brought his emergency beacon, though Marcus prayed he wouldn't need to use it. The dragons had been learning to camouflage themselves, a natural ability that would develop fully as they matured. But they were still young, and their control was imperfect. In situations of stress or excitement, their scales would flicker through random colors like broken holo displays. "Remember what we practiced," Marcus whispered, leading them toward the shelter's rear exit. "Stay calm, match the environment, and stay close to me." They moved into the forest as the Korthak ship passed overhead, its scanning beams cutting through the canopy in systematic sweeps. Marcus guided his strange family deeper into the woods, following game trails he'd mapped during his weeks of exploration. The hatchlings were remarkably quiet, instinctively understanding the need for stealth. Their natural camouflage was getting better under stress, their scales shifting to match the dappled green and brown of the forest floor. But Marcus knew it wouldn't be enough if the raiders got close. Behind them, he heard the distinctive whine of Korthak landing thrusters. They'd found his shelter. Moving as quickly and quietly as possible, Marcus led the dragons toward a series of limestone caves he'd discovered during his second week on the planet. The cave system was extensive, with multiple chambers and passages that would make it difficult for raiders to search thoroughly. But as they approached the cave entrance, Atlas suddenly stopped, his scales shifting to angry red and orange. The young dragon was growling, a sound Marcus had never heard from him before. The others quickly picked up on their brother's agitation, their own scales beginning to shift toward warning colors. "What is it?" Marcus whispered, then saw the answer. Fresh claw marks scored the rock around the cave entrance, large claw marks from adult dragons. And there was a smell in the air, something metallic and sharp that made Marcus's nose wrinkle. Blood. Recent blood. Luna made a soft, sad sound and pressed against Marcus's leg. She'd recognized the scent, too. It was dragon blood, but not from their family. Other dragons had been here recently, and something terrible had happened to them. The Korthak hadn't just arrived. They'd been hunting on this planet for some time, and this cave had been one of their killing grounds. Marcus felt rage building in his chest, a cold fury that surprised him with its intensity. He'd read the reports about dragon poaching, seen the statistics and conservation projections. But seeing the evidence firsthand, smelling the blood of murdered creatures, knowing that his adopted children could easily be next, transformed abstract knowledge into personal vendetta. But anger wouldn't keep them alive. Marcus forced himself to think tactically, the way his military father had taught him years ago. The cave was compromised, but there were other options. The forest was vast, full of hiding places. The Korthak were good hunters, but they were still alien to this environment. They would rely on technology rather than instinct. "Change of plans," he whispered to the dragons, who were looking up at him with complete trust despite the danger surrounding them. "We're going to do something very human." Humans were ambush predators when necessary. They were also tool users, capable of turning any environment into a weapon. And most importantly, they protected their young with a ferocity that made other species uncomfortable. Marcus led them away from the cave toward a section of forest where the trees grew close together and the undergrowth was thick. As they moved, he began implementing a plan that was either brilliant or suicidal. He started leaving trail markers, subtle signs that the Korthak would recognize as dragon sign, broken branches at the right height, claw marks on tree bark, scale fragments carefully placed where scanners would detect them. He was creating a false trail, leading the raiders away from his actual position toward a section of forest where the terrain would work in his favor. The hatchlings watched him work with growing understanding. When he began gathering certain plants and fungi, they started helping without being asked. They brought him the thorny vines he needed, the ones with natural neurotoxins. They found the mineral deposits that would interfere with scanner readings. They were learning that their human father was more dangerous than he appeared. By late afternoon, Marcus had prepared his trap. The false trail led to a narrow ravine where he'd rigged several primitive but effective surprises. Deadfall traps triggered by pressure plates, toxic spores that would be released when the Korthak scanning equipment interfered with certain native fungi, trip lines that would send raiders tumbling into pits lined with those neurotoxic thorns. It wasn't sophisticated, but it didn't need to be. It only needed to slow them down and make them reconsider whether the hunt was worth the risk. As evening approached, Marcus heard the Korthak moving through the forest. They were following his false trail perfectly, their insectoid clicking growing louder as they approached his prepared ground. "Stay hidden," he whispered to the dragons, who had camouflaged themselves so well they were nearly invisible even to him. "No matter what happens, stay hidden until I come back for you." Luna made a soft sound of protest, and Marcus realized she understood exactly what he was planning. She knew he was going to face the raiders alone, and she didn't like it. "I have to," he said gently, touching her snout with his gloved hand. "It's what parents do. They protect their children." He moved toward the ravine, staying well clear of his own traps. The first Korthak had just entered the kill zone when Marcus activated his emergency beacon, not to call for help, but to create a massive electromagnetic pulse that would interfere with their equipment. The effect was immediate. Korthak's scanning devices shrieked in protest as their sensors overloaded. Communication equipment sparked and failed. In the confusion, the first raider stepped directly onto one of Marcus's pressure plates. The deadfall trap triggered perfectly, sending a massive log swinging down to catch the Korthak in the chest. The raider went down hard, his chitinous armor cracked but not broken, but he was stunned, and that was enough. Marcus was already moving, using the raider's momentary confusion to get closer. He'd studied Korthak anatomy during his xenobiology training. He knew where their vulnerable spots were, how their joints worked, what would disable them without necessarily killing them. The second raider triggered the toxic spore release, filling the ravine with a cloud of paralytic compounds. The Korthak's breathing apparatus filtered out most of the toxins, but enough got through to slow their reaction times. By the time the third raider realized they were being hunted rather than hunting, Marcus had already disabled 2 of their number and was stalking the rest through their own equipment failures. The Korthak team leader finally managed to get his communications working long enough to send a retreat signal. They gathered their wounded and fled toward their ship, leaving behind expensive scanning equipment and their pride. Marcus watched them go from his concealment, his heart racing with adrenaline and relief. He'd done it. He'd protected his children using nothing but human ingenuity and a parent's determination to defend his young. But as he made his way back to where the dragons were hiding, Marcus realized something important had changed. This wasn't just about conservation anymore, or scientific study, or following mission parameters. This was personal. The Korthak would be back, probably with more ships and better equipment. Other poachers would follow. The dragons of Kepler 442b would never be truly safe as long as the galaxy saw them as valuable commodities rather than intelligent beings deserving of respect. Marcus found his adopted children exactly where he'd left them, their camouflage finally failing as they rushed to greet him with excited chirps and gentle headbutts. They knew he'd protected them, and their joy was infectious. As they made their way to a new hiding spot deeper in the forest, Marcus began planning their future. Not just survival, but something more ambitious. Something that would require him to think like a human rather than a scientist. The galaxy needed to learn that dragons weren't just animals to be poached or preserved. They were people, with families and intelligence and the right to live free. And Marcus was going to teach them that lesson one way or another. His children deserved nothing less. 6 months after the Korthak attack, Marcus had become something he never expected to be. a revolutionary. His daily reports to the Galactic Conservation Alliance had transformed from scientific observations into carefully crafted propaganda pieces, building a case for dragon intelligence that even the most bureaucratic minds couldn't ignore. But it was his unofficial activities that would have scandalized his superiors. In the depths of Kepler 442b's ancient forests, Marcus was running an underground school for dragon liberation. His 6 adopted children had grown into magnificent juveniles, each nearly the size of Earth horses. Their intelligence had blossomed beyond anything Marcus had imagined possible. Atlas had learned to use tools, fashioning simple weapons from forest materials. Luna had developed an almost supernatural ability to sense the emotions and intentions of other creatures. Storm could navigate by the planet's magnetic field, while Ember had begun experimenting with controlled fire as a communication method. But the most remarkable development was their language acquisition. Marcus had been teaching them modified sign language, using their claws to form symbols. Within weeks, they were not only communicating complex ideas, but creating their own grammatical structures and abstract concepts. "Today we learned about mathematics," Marcus said into his voice recorder during one of their evening lessons. Sage solved a geometric puzzle that would challenge most undergraduate students. These aren't animals, they're people, and the galaxy needs to acknowledge that fact. The problem was that acknowledgement would require admitting that the current treatment of dragons constituted genocide rather than pest control. Too many powerful interests had too much invested in maintaining the status quo. Marcus's solution was typically human. If the system wouldn't change through proper channels, he would force it to change through public pressure and undeniable evidence. His opportunity came when long-range sensors detected an incoming diplomatic vessel. The ship bore the insignia of the Galactic Council's Ethics Committee, investigating reports of illegal hunting activities on Kepler 442b. What they didn't know was that they were about to encounter something that would fundamentally challenge their understanding of personhood and rights. Marcus spent 3 days preparing his children for what might be the most important performance of their lives. They needed to demonstrate their intelligence in ways that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. More importantly, they needed to do it while appearing untrained and natural. The diplomats landed in the same clearing where Marcus had first encountered the dying mother dragon. It was a deliberate choice, honoring the sacrifice that had brought his strange family together. The delegation consisted of representatives from 5 different species: Zentaurian, crystalline, energy beings from the Veil Nebula, aquatic deepholm, and 1 human ambassador named Dr. Sarah Chen. Marcus approached their landing site alone, his hands visible and empty, following standard first contact protocols. The dragons remained hidden in the forest, waiting for his signal. "Dr. Marcus Chen, xenobiologist assigned to Conservation Project 7 Alpha," he announced to the diplomatic team. "I'm afraid I have some disturbing information to share with your committee." Ambassador Chen, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair, stepped forward as the team's spokesperson. "Dr. Chen, we've received reports of systematic poaching in this sector. Our mission is to assess the situation and recommend appropriate action." "The poaching is real," Marcus confirmed. "But that's not the most important issue you'll be addressing today. Please follow me. There's something you need to see." He led them to a section of forest where he'd prepared a demonstration area. It looked natural, like a dragon nesting ground, but every element had been carefully arranged to showcase his children's abilities. Marcus gave a subtle hand signal, and the dragons emerged from concealment with breathtaking grace. The diplomatic team froze as 6 magnificent creatures materialized from the forest shadows, their scales shimmering with perfect camouflage before shifting to display patterns. But instead of the primitive animal behavior the diplomats expected, the dragons immediately began demonstrating complex social interactions. Atlas approached each diplomat individually, offering what were clearly formal greetings. Luna positioned herself protectively between the smaller dragons and the strangers, while maintaining a calm, non-threatening posture that spoke of intelligence rather than instinct. "Remarkable specimens," the Zentaurian representative commented, his metallic voice modulated for diplomatic protocols. "Their social structure appears more sophisticated than our preliminary studies suggested." "They're not specimens," Marcus said quietly. "They're people. Watch." Ember stepped forward and began creating patterns in the dirt with precise claw movements. The patterns were mathematical equations, geometric proofs, and artistic designs that demonstrated abstract thinking capabilities. Storm joined her, adding musical notations that corresponded to the harmonic frequencies the dragons used for long-distance communication. The diplomatic team was growing increasingly uncomfortable as they realized what they were witnessing. These weren't animals performing trained behaviors. These were intelligent beings engaging in creative expression. "How long have you been conditioning them?" the crystalline representative asked, their collective consciousness clearly struggling to process the implications. "I haven't been conditioning them," Marcus replied. "I've been raising them. These 6 dragons are orphans whose parents were killed by Korthak poachers. I've been their guardian and teacher for 6 months, but their intelligence is entirely natural." Luna approached Ambassador Chen and began making complex gestures with her claws. The human woman stared in amazement as she realized the dragon was attempting to communicate in modified sign language. "She's trying to tell me something," Chen whispered. "Those are mathematical symbols but arranged in a pattern I don't recognize." "She's asking about your children," Marcus translated. "Dragons are intensely family-oriented. Luna wants to know if you have offspring and whether they're safe. She's expressing concern for your well-being as a parent." The ambassador's eyes filled with tears as the full impact hit her. "She's asking about my family. She understands the concept of parenthood across species lines." Sage and Frost began working together on a more complex demonstration, using tools they'd crafted to create a 3-dimensional model of the local star system. Their accuracy was perfect, down to the orbital mechanics of the planet's 3 moons. "Impossible," the Zentaurian declared. "Non-spacefaring species cannot possess such knowledge without external input." "They observed the night sky and calculated the orbital patterns themselves," Marcus explained. "Dragons have excellent mathematical intuition and natural curiosity about their universe. Given proper education, they could probably develop their own space program within a few generations." The energy being from the Veil Nebula pulsed with agitation. "If this is accurate, then current classification protocols are fundamentally flawed. These creatures cannot be legally hunted if they demonstrate personhood characteristics." "That's exactly my point," Marcus said. "The dragon species of Kepler 442b has been systematically murdered for their body parts while possessing intelligence equal to or exceeding many recognized galactic citizens. This isn't conservation failure, it's genocide." Atlas stepped forward and began making gestures toward the diplomatic team. His movements were formal, ritualistic, reminiscent of ceremonial greetings Marcus had observed in various galactic cultures. "He's offering you formal welcome to his territory," Marcus interpreted. "Dragons understand concepts of sovereignty, hospitality, and diplomatic courtesy. Atlas is treating you as visiting dignitaries rather than threats." Ambassador Chen was openly weeping now, her scientific training warring with her emotional response to what she was witnessing. "This changes everything," she whispered. "If dragons possess demonstrable intelligence and social structures, they qualify for protected person status under Galactic Council law." The Deepholm representative, speaking through their translation device, raised practical concerns. Implementation would be complex. Current legal frameworks regarding Kepler 442b would require complete revision. Economic interests would resist such changes. Economic interests built on murder, Marcus said bluntly. Every dragon killed for the black market represents the destruction of a sentient being with family relationships, creative capacity, and the potential for technological development. How is that different from any other form of genocide? Luna approached Marcus and made a complex series of gestures, then moved to each of the diplomatic team members in turn. Her meaning was unmistakable. She was introducing Marcus as her father and protector and requesting that the strangers treat him with appropriate respect. "She's defending me," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "Luna recognizes that I've put myself at risk to protect them, and she's trying to return the favor." The diplomatic team spent 3 more days observing the dragons, conducting careful tests of their cognitive abilities, and documenting behaviors that clearly demonstrated sapience. By the end of their visit, even the most skeptical members were forced to admit that current classification systems were woefully inadequate. "Our preliminary recommendation will be immediate elevation to protected person status," Ambassador Chen announced. "Furthermore, we're recommending full criminal investigation of all previous hunting activities, with charges of crimes against sapient life." But the real victory came on their final evening, when the dragons performed something Marcus hadn't taught them and hadn't expected. As the diplomatic team prepared to depart, all 6 dragons gathered in a circle around their human father. They began to sing. The harmonies were complex, mathematically precise, and hauntingly beautiful. The song told the story of loss and adoption, of a strange creature who had chosen to become family to orphaned children of another species. It spoke of sacrifice and protection, of love that transcended biology. The dragons had composed a song about their human father. Marcus found himself surrounded by 6 magnificent creatures who had grown from helpless hatchlings into proud young dragons under his care. They weren't performing for the diplomats anymore. This was a private family moment, shared with witnesses who finally understood what they were seeing. As the song reached its crescendo, Luna approached Marcus and gently rested her great head against his chest. One by one, the others joined her, creating a protective circle around the human who had risked everything to save them. Ambassador Chen activated her recording equipment, capturing the moment for galactic history. "For the record," she said formally, "this diplomatic mission has documented the first case of successful interspecies adoption between humans and dragons. The implications for our understanding of family, intelligence, and personhood are profound." Marcus sat in the center of the dragon circle, surrounded by his children, and realized that his life had become something extraordinary. He'd started as a scientist trying to preserve an endangered species. He'd become a father protecting his family. But more than that, he'd proven something important about humanity itself. Humans didn't just explore the galaxy and catalog its wonders. They formed connections, created families, and fought to protect those they loved, regardless of species or biology. The dragons continued their song as the stars emerged overhead, 3 moons casting silver light on an unlikely family that had changed the course of galactic history. Marcus closed his eyes and listened to his children sing, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges but also new possibilities. The hunt was over. His real life was just beginning.